During the 300-year rule of the Kalabhras, the Chola dynasty was reduced to minor landlords. When their rule was ended by the united forces of Pallavas, Pandyas and Chalukyas, the Chola pride was not restored. They survived in altered forms, adapting to changing political realities, while quietly preserving their lineage, military traditions, and administrative experience. The later Chola Empire that we know of became great only by living centuries under these other dynasties and learning while living through them. Before the political upheavals of the early centuries CE, the Cholas were firmly established as one of the principal ruling houses of Tamilakam. During the Sangam Age, their power rested on control of the Kaveri river basin, one of the most productive agricultural zones in South India. The reliability of Kaveri irrigation supported dense settlements, surplus grain, and a stable revenue base, all of which allowed the Cholas to sustain armies and urban centers. Their authority was anchored in two important cities. Uraiyur functioned as an inland political and commercial center, particularly associated with textile production, while Kaveripattinam, located at the mouth of the Kaveri, served as a major port connected to maritime trade routes across the Bay of Bengal. Together, these centers linked agriculture, craft production, and overseas commerce into a single political economy. Chola rulers of this period, most notably Karikala, were remembered not only for military success, but for large-scale public works such as irrigation embankments. These projects reflected a state that possessed both organizational capacity and long-term vision. By the end of the Sangam Age, around 300 CE, the Cholas were neither peripheral chiefs nor fragile rulers. They were a deeply rooted dynasty with territorial confidence. An obscure group, known as the Kalabhras, with no clear origins, swept across the Tamil land and dismantled a 600-year social, religious, and political order built by the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. When the Kalabhras moved into the Tamil country, they took advantage of internal divisions within the Chola lineage, which by then was fractured among the descendants of the legendary Karikala Chola. Exploiting this weakness, the Kalabhras dismantled the existing political order and swept aside the old Chola authority. In the centuries that followed, a dynasty that had once dominated the Kaveri basin was reduced to holding small, scattered territories and surviving without independent sovereignty. In this video, we will trace what happened to the Cholas after the Kalabhra takeover, how they lived through this long period of political marginalization, what they learned while governing minor territories and serving under more powerful rulers, and how these experiences quietly prepared them for a return to power nearly 2 centuries later. Soon after the Kalabhras took over their region, the Cholas lost control over the Kaveri Delta, which had been the core of their power, and the Chola lineage fragmented. Uraiyur and Kaveripattinam ceased to function as Chola capitals, and the dynasty virtually disappears from inscriptions within its own homeland for several centuries. While the core lineage stayed hidden in Uraiyur, stripped of power, the more adventurous branches migrated north, crossing into the rugged terrains of Renandu, the modern-day Kadapa and Kurnool districts of Andhra Pradesh. Some branches appear to have remained in the Kaveri region in diminished roles, functioning as local chieftains under new political arrangements. Other branches moved northward, away from the regions most affected by Kalabhra control. By the 5th and 6th centuries, Chola descendants can be traced in the Rayalaseema region of Andhra Pradesh. These rulers governed small territories and remained under more powerful overlords, but they continued to identify themselves as Cholas and maintained genetic claims linking themselves to earlier kings like Karikala Chola. If you want to understand more about the origins, you can head over to the link in the description. Anyway, with time, these northern branches became known as the Telugu Chodas. This development reveals an important survival strategy that was played out by the Cholas. They did not insist on linguistic or regional purity. In fact, they were the first dynasty to issue stone inscriptions in the Telugu language, abandoning their native Tamil. They adapted to new environments while constantly preserving dynastic memory, titles, and claims of descent for decades to come. Their identity became the core asset they protected. From roughly the 6th century until the mid-9th century, the Cholas lived under the dominance of stronger regional powers. The Pallavas, ruling from Kanchipuram, expanded southward, while the Pandyas reasserted themselves from Madurai. The Chola heartland lay between these two rivals, leaving little room for independent revival. In this context, the Cholas functioned as subordinate rulers. They governed defined local districts called as nadus, collected revenue for their overlords, maintained irrigation systems, something that they were famous for, and provided military service to their overlords. Inscriptions from Pallava and Pandya territories, for example the one from Ulakalanda Perumal Temple, occasionally refer to Chola chiefs as administrators and allies within a larger political framework. Although this position lacked prestige, it offered continuity. The Cholas retained experience in governance and warfare, even while operating within constraints imposed by stronger kingdoms. Despite their reduced political status, the Chola lineage continued to carry considerable symbolic value. They belonged to the Surya Vamsa, or the solar race. For the rising Pallavas and Pandyas, who were often seen as new money, marrying a Chola was a way to buy legitimacy. This reputation made them attractive marriage partners for ruling houses seeking to strengthen their claims to authority. Both Pallava and Pandya rulers took Chola princesses as queens. These marriages were not gestures of charity. They allowed currently dominant dynasties to associate themselves with an older, respected lineage, thereby reinforcing their own standing among elites and subjects. For the Cholas, such alliances provided security and access. Marriages integrated Chola family members into powerful royal courts, ensuring their protection and maintaining their relevance within high-level political networks. In some cases, these ties also allowed Chola chiefs to coordinate informally with one power against another, depending on circumstances. A crucial aspect of Chola survival during this period was continued participation in warfare. As feudatories, Chola chiefs were obligated to contribute troops and commanders to their overlords' campaigns. As a result, Chola warriors remained active participants in regional conflicts for centuries. This service preserved their martial traditions and provided continuous exposure to evolving military practices. Chola leaders observed how large armies were organized, how fortifications were defended, and how supply lines were maintained. They learned from both the strengths and weaknesses of the Pallava and Pandya systems. This experience later proved invaluable. When the Cholas regained independence, they did not need to experiment with military organization. They already possessed leaders and soldiers accustomed to sustained campaigning and complex command structures. Alongside military service, Chola chiefs developed administrative expertise. They managed local assemblies, supervised irrigation works, and coordinated tax collection. These responsibilities required cooperation with village institutions and religious establishments, fostering systems of governance that balanced central authority with local participation. The administrative sophistication that we greatly admire of the later Chola Empire did not emerge suddenly in the 9th century. It evolved from these earlier practices, refined during decades of subordinate rule. What changed after independence was only the scale. The structure was set up by decades of learning under dominant hands of Pallavas and Pandyas. By the early 9th century, the political balance in South India had become unstable. Prolonged warfare weakened the Pallavas, while the Pandyas faced their own internal and external pressures. Control over key regions shifted frequently, and local powers such as the Muttarayars held strategic territories as intermediaries. It was within this context that a Chola chief named Vijayalaya acted and took it upon himself to restore the Chola pride. The Chola resurgence under him is what we will see in the upcoming episodes.